So we're gonna start, so all mill around quietly and focus intently, because it's for you all. So welcome Karim to Brief Sesh, which for context, and I love that you agreed to do this with almost absolutely no content. Shuffle quietly, as if we're recording the thing.
Are we not recording them?
Oh, we are.
Why did you say as if?
Because it seems as if it is less apparent to the loud shufflers. As you can see, Karim, this talk show is equal parts classroom and talk show. Yeah, we'll continue to preface. So this is a social practice class. And again, I love that you agreed to do this without any sort of knowledge of what is going on. And I don't, would you say that you have knowledge of what social practice is, or would it be helpful for me to contextualize?
My knowledge of social practice is largely informed by what I've heard you share about social practice. So I'm happy to get some context. I'm always trying to learn.
I love it when anyone likes to define social practice for Karim. Oh, I'll pick someone. All right, Air, it's you. Will you join us on will you pop into frame?
Yeah, otherwise I don't really know that there's anyone else there. You know, this could
Yeah.
all be a ruse.
It's real, there's a person.
Hi,
Oh.
You don't have to blind yourself. You're visible on
I can see you.
the red is visible. So if you
Oh, I
stand
see.
between the projection. But yeah, what is social practice?
To me, social practice is a art that involves other people, so interacting with other people, engaging other people, and sharing perspectives through just about any means you can contextualize in art, I guess. So it can involve food, it can involve fine arts such as like painting and stuff, or it can be more like conversations. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So it's interesting, we started this project as a part of the class, both as a way of demonstrating a project by making a project. So we're like inside of a project. And to bring guests in under a certain context, and was interesting because Matoska had just passed away. And so was like searching for a way in which to like navigate that or hold it. And so wrapped all these things into the project of Brief Sesh and has kind of ballooned. I'm curious, Lily, you can join us. I'm gonna inquire as the various Brief Sessions have occurred, like how would you fold them together as one project? Like, how do you understand them as having value in the classroom setting?
Sure. So this is our fourth Brief Sesh.
I think so.
And they cover a lot of different topics, all obviously centered on brief, but kind of branching in many different directions. And having like just sat like and listened to them, but then also reflected after them. I don't know, each time I examine like a different part of my life, but also just relates mainly back to life as a whole. And like there are a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily think would be moving, but that maybe you are, or maybe everyone is. I don't know. I think of it just as kind of like a designated time for reflection and for talking to guests or welcome to the classroom. Basically.
Excellent. Love it.
But there's also like ritual, like eating bread.
You would be enjoying bread, but you're not. But
Can't
so
eat bread anyway, so.
there you go.
But I am sharing in the communion of fellowship.
Yeah, there's chewing on camera.
Hmm.
So that's like a super general introduction to this talk show format. There's a couple of reasons I wanted to invite you onto the show. One of which being that I know you recently are still navigating loss and grief, and it was interesting given a lot of things, but at least on a surface level, like when we're interacting, we're always like in the middle of a whole bunch of other stuff.
Mhm.
So there's less space in which to like hold it. So there's that, but, and so it's nice that we have this space, and, Kareem and I work together. Will you slide the door closed behind you? Kareem and I work together on a project which I'll allow Kareem to further contextualize both their position and the project. But we took a field trip to, like chronologically Harriet Tubman, 'cause it was like further south. And we looked at I-5 and then we hit, I think Jefferson from there. And then did a quick drive-by for on King School. We also chatted with Kason, so we went to the butcher shop. And then we also, ran into Kent Ford briefly while he was painting a house. And then came back to campus. So, but it's interesting, everyone and you, Kareem, can think about how Kareem's proper formal understanding of social practice may be limited, but the kind of work that Kareem is doing and we do together, I'm attending that space as a social practice artist, but there's a lot of overlap. So Kareem, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'm curious. I never actually asked who in your life you lost, because it was a strange space, but we can start there.
Sure. Whew. Well, other than my name, um, should I start with personal information? Should I start with what I do with co-locate and how that kind of has whatever?
I love it. I mean, this is a talk show and I invited you unaffiliated and you get to hold who you are and how you are,
Right.
which as a part of social practice, there's a lot of constructing on how you might do that,
Mhm.
depending also on the space. You're in this space and you get to choose, but I was gonna say, I don't know if you noticed, but you're on it's contemporary.
Mhm. No, I love, don't often see my name up in letters in front of other people in a big way. So I'm honored and humbled to be here. I'll start with myself, and then I'll talk about what my practice looks like, and then I can talk about my grief, if that seems appropriate. Um, so my name is Kareem. I uh, I was going to say my pronouns, but I'll say I don't identify with the gender binary. They them is preferable, although I feel like language is inadequate to sort of describe gender right now. But my heritage, my culture is a mixture. I'm a multi-hyphenated person. So I'm Egyptian, I'm American, I'm Muslim, I'm Jewish. I grew up outside of this country being perceived as American and moved to this country being perceived as other foreign. Um, I I write poetry. I make things, jewelry, sculpture, um, painting, whatever I can kind of find the time and the inspiration for, uh, usually as a way of communicating to myself what it is that I'm feeling. Um, I don't do a lot of work that I like. I've never shown art, and so I think for that reason have hesitated to call myself an artist. And also my path as a creative person, as someone who's trying to create and do something in the world, has been more in the avenue of the design industry, so spatial design. I went to school for landscape architecture in Eugene, at the University of Oregon. And when I was in school, having moved straight from Cairo, Egypt to Eugene, um, aside from all the culture shock that came from going from a city of like 22 million people to Eugene, uh, I also was, a brown, Arab, read as male, person with a Muslim-y sounding name, existing in this country after 9/11. And and so I think a lot of my ways that I view myself or my identity, I know a lot of the ways that I view myself and my identity were shaped by being here in this context, in this body, and being asked to answer for the world, right? Why are your people the way that they are? Well, then that makes me have to think about who my people are and what are we talking about here and where those differences are and where the lines get drawn and what do I believe and what of that is like truly what my convictions are versus what I've just inherited or been enculturated into. And I'll stop that ramble, but it felt worth sharing, in that I think from both nature and nurture, I'm a person who loves complexity and has a really hard time with reductive thinking, or trying to like bring an issue or the world or people like into neat boxes. I don't think those boxes really exist. And I also find it really satisfying and exciting to explore the like squishy gray boundary areas where like these lines that we draw actually break apart. And being a designer, having studied landscape architecture, at the time that I was in school, the revolution in Egypt was happening. And the Arab Spring uprisings and Occupy Wall Street, all of that was going on. But I was here watching this revolution unfold in my hometown, watching, to talk about grief, watching the city that I grew up in, the streets that I lived on, my downtown, people uniting in a way that I had never seen or believed was possible or been taught to believe was possible, across these lines, across these dividers, across these boundaries, socially constructed boundaries, and creating a place for themselves, a revolutionary place, a liberated space in the heart of an oppressive state. And around me, my friends and fellow students were designing beautiful parks and riparian restoration projects and learning about GIS and how to site a building on a slope and sunlight and all these things. And I was watching the revolution and wondering, what can I contribute? Like where are the design practitioners? Where are the people who shape urban form in revolution? And that prompted my thesis, which was really looking at the formation of the urban form in Cairo, as this tension or this dynamic between top-down power structures capitalizing off of space, restricting people's access to physical space, or controlling it and corralling it, versus the ways that people in everyday life break that. And then I like got a job in a landscape architecture firm and I was working on parking lots for 3 years. And then I quit that job and I said, where do projects come from? Where does this work come from? Where's the money come from? Like, how do I find the work that is meaningful to me? I have these skills, I've got this debt, I want to make these contributions. I want to shape the world towards justice, towards liberation. And so I took a job in marketing and communications at an architecture firm. And I am more affirmedly anti-capitalist now than I was when I started that process. But I also learned a ton, and I didn't have to pay for an MBA. But I really like got that exposure to like the politics and the money behind the built environment in a way that like I never got in my formal education, and I wouldn't have gotten from just being in front of AutoCAD or like doing design work on parking lots for 5 years until I became a project manager and blah, 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 blah. And now my work feels aligned with my sense of purpose and value. In that after 7 years doing marketing and communications, I got to a point where I said, can I curse on this show?
They're uncomfortable with cursing. We're getting thumbs up and nods.
Okay, I'm going to take that as consent. I got to a point where I said, fuck this shit. I'm not, I cannot sit in a practice and be fighting inside this organization, inside this firm for the kind of structural change required, be like advocating for us to do work that's meaningful in community and responsive to community, be putting my time into pro bono or volunteer projects, be organizing around the side, around the edges, and then at the same time be working on a proposal to do office renovations for Microsoft. Like that doesn't work. It doesn't work in the framework that we've said our values are in as an organization, and it doesn't work for me to be contributing my time and labor in that way. You know, whether it's designing high-rise market rate apartment buildings, market rate that only developers are really profiting off of, or office space for tech companies that build the surveillance technology that polices our Black and brown people around the world. Grief permeates that entire journey on personal and social levels beyond the personal. And I will invite the host to prompt or pull in whatever direction on that.
It's in just a lot of things. One, I feel like I'm navigating in my own life a bunch of stuff, and so could have more well planned or prepped you or whatever. But also I think in social practice, a theme of grief sesh and then like whatever everything in between is just like, oh, whatever, come as you are. But I was gonna say like, yeah, you could bring slides, and I was like, yeah, fuck it. But also I know Kareem's a talker, so that was Kareem's introduction. But yeah, I think it's interesting how, I don't know, we've had guests, one guest in particular, Shelby Loomis, who has done a lot of work particularly about grief, and was interesting in even like starting this, was in conversation with her a little bit. And since starting, I like am actually seeing how present grief is in so many different things. It's like invisible. I mean, even as I experience it, I feel like it's present and uncomfortable, but I'm just like, it's almost intangible. I'm like, oh, everything in my life's going good, but I feel shitty. But yeah, just all of those specific nuances. Yeah, I was thinking really particularly about when you were talking about being in school and learning, and at the same time, this kind of like upheaval was happening, and like this kind of like tension between what you're feeling and all that stuff. And it's interesting too, I was thinking about prior to this, but just a lot of students right now in all of the institutions that I'm in, it's just like tiring, like getting like loss of energy, like all this different stuff, and trying to like do work is like a tough paradox. And so yeah, I think my invitation, and we can talk more shop later, but will be, because I know you've been like working on this stuff while navigate like acute grief in the at least the traditional sense of this show. What both, I guess, is a two-pronged question. Again, I don't have a lot of details. You're like, something had happened, and it's interesting. I think, I mean, I remember we were having a meeting and you like got a call about it like moments prior, and then the next time we interacted, you like, the person had passed, and then you were like gone. And then you came back a little tender, but like now you've just been like going on doing stuff. So yeah, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the context and how you've been able to navigate the work you're doing, which will later segue into that work and all of the grief attached to that. But yeah, how you've just been able to like hold the experience you have as a working professional.
Great question. Well, first I'll just share what the genesis or event, the loss, which I feel like is central to grief in so many ways was, which is one of my uncles passed away, and I love him. I loved him. I still do. Uh, my this was my mom's sister's husband. So my mom has one sibling, and so this was my one uncle on my maternal side, and it wasn't unexpected. He was old. He was 98. He had a rare form of blood cancer that he'd been fighting for years. But it was sudden. He was playing basketball into his 80s. He was a psychiatrist. He was a card carrying member of the Communist Party back when they gave cards out. He worked with youth, and his focus was on trauma and on things like traumatic rupture in relationships and on moral injury, which is a concept I encourage folks to learn about. It's really interesting. But through all of the heavy work that he did, he was one of the most open and generous people in my life, and someone whose own personal life was really filled with grief and trauma, with loss, and with family division and conflict, and yet that was not manifest in the way that he related to us, at least myself, my siblings. Losing him, having him pass away, even though we had talked at length over the months that he had his health had been declining, about his coming to terms with his imminent death. Like, we had talked a lot about that, and I have never had and still have not had conversations with an adult or an elder in my life about death and dying from their perspective that wasn't just filled with fear or trying to avoid the topic or the conversation. And he approached it with curiosity, and with sadness at what he would no longer be able to be a part of in our lives and in his wife's life. They're 18 years apart in age. He was older, and so they had been having conversations for a long time about the fact that he was likely going to pass away before her. And when he passed away, it was in his sleep, and it was painless, and it was at home and not in hospice or not in some sort of hospital environment. So in all ways, a gracious ending to a gracious life, in all ways possible. Where that intersects with a broader trajectory of grief, which feels important to add context to, is that over the last year, my nuclear family of origin, has been going through what I would call maybe a shitstorm. My long story short, from a blended family, from a mixed family, my father, Muslim, Egyptian, fairly conservative, also narcissistic and abusive. My mom, in a relationship with him for 30 years. And an event took place that essentially led to my sister and I not being on speaking terms with our dad anymore, and my mom leaving Egypt to escape him. And as of 2 weeks ago, they're divorced. And it was our uncle and aunt, my mom's sister, and her husband, who held the space for nurturing elders, as parents when our parents could not be parents, that helped us as siblings navigate the trauma and the grief of our family structure fracturing in that way. So it was more than the loss of him as an individual or as a beloved uncle, but also the loss of someone who was there when we needed someone and now is not there. And that's sad.
Was that signatory?
I think that's it.
I was gonna say, so you've been working, thank you for sharing the context of me and Wonder, but you've been like working at the same time as this happening, without, to my awareness, any sort of like meaningful stoppage, maybe like practical necessity, but there's been a timeline that we both have been bound to. So I'm curious, you can maybe like describe both what this project is, or maybe you can start by describing it and can pepper in ways in which you coped or navigated, but and also, I mean, the kind of the magnetic north, polar north of this show is kind of brief. It's kind of like what the mood is in a way, but at the same time, it's educational. So a lot of the work that we do, I do, that you do, why we do it and how we do it, and then some of the politics in that community, which is also kind of deep freaking in ways. So yeah, all of that is a mood that we can surf towards.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, what I do now as my job for work is I work with I'm part of an organization, a small nonprofit design justice practice called Co-Locate Design. And we are a team of all BIPOC organizers, activists, architects, designers, using the tools of organizing, advocacy, and architecture to address the structures of injustice in our society, physical and social. And we've been working on the redesign of Jefferson High School, which sounds like y'all already have some context for that effort and that project. But Co-Locate was brought on to the project team as the community engagement consultant. And we're not really community engagement consultants. We're what I said. We're about systems change, and we're not trying to perpetuate just like extractive models of outreach so that we can say, look, we talked to all these people and therefore good job, you did it, you engaged. However, because our approach to community engagement is really more informed by community organizing, one of the ways that we do that is working with folks like Michael. On any project, we try to steer project resources, meaning money and time and space, towards recruiting a team of folks who are in and of the communities that are most impacted by the work being done, and who have historically and continuously had the least amount of influence or agency over shaping the decisions within those processes. And because Jeff is the Black high school in Portland, has historically been the predominantly Black high school and still is predominantly Black and brown, and exists within the context of northeast Portland and the Albina area, which has been the predominantly Black neighborhood until processes of gentrification and displacement and policies that support those processes have been unfolding. We were brought into this project and into this process with a sort of binary in front of us, which shouldn't have been posed as a binary, but was. And that binary was, should we tear everything down, tear all these existing structures down and replace, this is the terminology of the school district, do a replacement project, all new construction on the same site, or should we do a modernization project, meaning retain and renovate a historic portion of the site, one of the buildings or pieces of the buildings, and then expand all new around that. And in the context of systemic oppression, violence, both officially sanctioned and unofficially sanctioned, policies at the district level, through the state level, through the federal level, and the practice of enacting those policies, Black children, families, community members with multi-generational roots in this place, at this school, are being tasked essentially as a consultant team to go out and find out what people want so that we can make a decision one way or another in 6 months. Completely that ask, that assignment was completely I don't know if I can say uninformed, maybe some people were informed, but divorced from the reckoning with that violence and trauma. Oppression is trauma. Oppression is traumatizing. Oppression in any shape has a physical, emotional, spiritual toll. And building a new school or even redesigning a school, renovating it, doesn't heal that trauma. And nobody really wants to look at that grief. Nobody wants to look at that anger, that pain. Because how do you put a good PR spin as a school district on that we didn't have enough time to heal all the harm that we've done? No, you want to be able to say, we talked to this many people and look at what a great job we're doing, and it's going to be a beautiful school. Hooray. It will be a beautiful school. Hooray. But for whom?
To pepper in some context, and it's interesting, I never really thought of it as like a PR spin component. I mean, it's obvious now that you said it, but my vantage point has been different. But for enhanced context, there was a meeting last night, and there was also like a shooting like 2 nights prior at the school.
Yes.
And there was a shooting.
A month ago, almost to the day before
Yeah,
that.
was it a week? 2 weeks?
A month ago, almost to the day.
And I found out the other time because I was also at like an event, a tour of a different high school. And part of what I'm holding is that like I've been working in this community. That's why we went to like the elementary and the middle schools. Like the trauma is like whatever, century old, you know, it's linked to slavery. But then there's all these very specific events that have happened in Portland history, including like it being illegal to live in Portland as a Black person. And then particularly within the fiefdom of Portland public schools, there's been a lot of like terrible decisions and things that we've done. And it's interesting what has become, I mean, I guess I knew this, but I heard people say it, which was like enhancedly meaningful for me and my own command of the content. But that like graduates of the 80s and 90s were navigating like huge gang and drug wars during like pinnacle gentrification. And so there's like a bunch of active trauma in the community, including like displacement, where now that community is predominantly not Black. And so PBS is like, okay, we want to do a good job, and we've got to like talk to people. But some of what my job and me and Karim and others are like navigating through is a lot of how Portland Public Schools is treating it. Is like, how many people did you talk to? And it's like, I don't know, I talked to 2 and they both were like irate. Do we need to talk to more to get a better picture, or is this helping you understand what's going on? And have encountered several folks who were so irate. You know, I was at Kason's once, and then this woman came in, and Kason was like, oh, let me introduce you. And she was a former principal for Jefferson. And I was like, oh, this is happening. And she was just like firing questions like, who's this for? What's the answer to this question? What's this? And I was like, the meetings are happening, you can come. It's like, I don't want to go. It's like so traumatized by the thing that don't even want to touch it. And so that's what Karim and I have been like negotiating around, trying to do this work, knowing and holding. It was interesting also to hear about like Karim. I mean, I have known anecdotally, but it was interesting to hear in detail like the context in which you come from, Karim, and also kind of interesting, particularly that you were in US while things were going on. It's like you had this kind of remote experience, and how that informs, you know, the work that we're doing now or trying to do. I'm curious, like, what's your temperature check on where it's at now? I mean, you mentioned, so during this moment of Karim's grief and my own, actually, the start of it for me, the 6-month timeline was when Matroska passed away. And we're getting ready to now embark on a 3-month timeline for the next phase. And so part of it for me, and especially even the event that happened last night, they should have canceled it. It's just like PBS continues to demonstrate a lack of understanding of being like acknowledging the community's concerns and trauma and all of this stuff. So that's where I'm at. I definitely have like incredibly bitter taste in my mouth. But what about you, Karim?
Well, I should.
And you should track your outro time experience, how much time you need to do whatever else you need to do before.
Okay. Well, I'm okay on time, and but I'll try to respond to that in a somewhat linear fashion, if that's possible for me. I want to start with the revolution in Egypt and not being there at the time that I was exiting my formal education, because within that there was a lot of grief, and I still hold that, you know, I still carry that, although with time and some distance, it's easier not to be immersed in it on a daily level. But I just the acute moment of, or the being in the acute time frame of watching tanks run over people in my hometown, or not knowing if people that I grew up with and went to school with were gonna make it through the week, and also watching this unfold with the promise of liberation and freedom, right? That people are capable, that we are capable of overthrowing decades old, entrenched, brutal, oppressive regimes. Like, that was both a moment of hope and of loss, and of and the feeling that I wasn't there was a really difficult one to wrap my mind around and like be navigating through while I was like trying to finish my studies and like put my thesis together. That I was surviving where others weren't, and felt some guilt around that. That I was distant and couldn't contribute in a direct way, and I felt sadness and also frustration around that. And so the question of where are designers in the revolution is one that I carried with me, especially as over the years the revolution in Egypt has died. And I don't believe that revolution truly disappears, but I do have to look at the situation in Egypt now and say the revolutionaries are in prison, the organizers and activists have been killed or imprisoned. Things froze on my end. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you now, but you are basically frozen.
Okay.
You're back.
All right, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, watching that, being here and seeing that happen, seeing the military reassert its control and power, massacre hundreds of people, and reestablish itself as clearly the power holder, while also co-opting the language of revolution and calling itself the defender of the revolution, right, which so often happens. There's grief and loss around that, like the feeling that I might never be able to go back to my home country, one of my home countries, but the place that feels like home the most, even though I've been away for so long, and be my full self. The irony and frustration of being in the heart of the imperial enterprise that is this country, that has contributed to the violence and oppression in Egypt tangibly and continues to do so, and feel like I have more freedom in some ways to be my full self here and explore my full sense of being here than I did there or would have there, is it's like mourning for something that you never had, which is maybe a kind of loss of promise or potential, rather than a loss of something that was. And in the context of this project and the work that I do now, I've been challenged with the question, why are you here? Why are you doing this work? Why are you, as someone who's not from Portland, from the Black community, part of this cultural context in a deep, long-standing way, why are you doing this? Why do you care? And I mean, that's a good question, and one that I have asked myself. And I don't know that this is a satisfactory answer to everyone, but this is the answer that came to me, which is that my entire life and my being has been shaped and is shaped by the same forces of oppressive imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal hegemony that take place and are shaping the lives around this project. It looks different in different parts of the world, but the same military industrial complex that fuels American wars of aggression and imperialism and colonialism, and for that matter, British or European interventions in the same way, is the mechanism that perpetuates the police state in this nation, is the mechanism that means that Portland Police Bureau gets $200+ million a year in their annual budget, whereas the high school that has served Black and brown families for generations and that has only survived through the direct advocacy and organizing of those communities gets $311 million once to last for 100 years. That's a lot of money, but that's not enough if we can afford to be putting $200+ million a year into the violent paramilitary group that is our police, the white supremacist organ that is policing. All our oppression is connected, and our liberation is incomplete if we're not all liberated. And so while I might not be able to go fight for liberation in Egypt, I can fight those same systems here, and I should, and I have to, because I believe that we should all be free. And I believe that that's not also an end goal, that is sort of accomplished one and done, but a constant process of building liberation where we are now, and building on models that have existed in the past, so that we are growing through the cracks and fracturing the concrete rather than thinking that we're going to come in and bulldoze everything in one fell swoop and then plant something new in its place. That also helps counter the grief for me. The belief that we can exist in a liberated manner in just our interactions with one another now, today, that the personal is political. Everything that I've learned from navigating my own family experiences with abuse and narcissistic personalities and patriarchy and racism, I've learned that in my family. And I can see that if I don't fight within my own family unit, like whatever I say my values are in the society around me, they don't matter as much, because where I have the most agency is within the deep personal relationships that I hold already. I will land that plane and invite.
No, I think it's interesting. I mean, we've had a bunch of different guests, and this class itself, I mean, just the last class, which was the class after we did an event. So this class through an event. And when I started the social practice class, I was like, it could be anything, which is like unhelpful in comprehension as much as it is true. And I think like it kind of came really full circle after like doing an event and being able to reflect on it. And so I think all the things you're saying is like, I don't know that we've gotten so political after like our first field trip, which, visited these sites, but it was kind of just a snapshot of my work. So this was like nice to kind of unfurl it further. Do you have questions for the class that they want to answer?
How many people are in the class?
7.
I did not come prepared with questions for the class.
Yeah, no, it's not important, but you can just think of something random. I try to get them to participate as much as possible.
Well, I guess I'd like to know if anyone has questions or reflections on anything I shared. I'd invite that.
Questions or reflections? I've learned in my short stint teaching in person that if you don't call on someone, you just got awkward silence. You know, do it in front of the camera so you can see. Yeah. Process.
I can't really hear for people who are behind the camera. Hi.
Yeah, I don't know, something you said, I mean, a lot of things you said resonated with me, but I think something that I haven't had like a personal experience with, but that like really kind of brought some understanding to maybe having, a situation where kind of like, I don't know, just experiencing like the revolution from far away and being connected to it, but like in kind of, just very distance way, like you said, revolution, like I don't know, it doesn't ever really disappear, I guess, and I feel like I haven't really thought about it that way, especially in these like really large, you know, like just total like turnover government, you know, revolutions that like are, yeah, there's definitely like, okay, this is over now, I guess, but I don't know, I think I've just never thought about how like it is not something that you can just kind of like leave be, like it seems like something that requires constant upkeep, and that is kind of like, I don't know, I think it falls by the wayside a lot of times. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but I just like, yeah, I'm just very.
Well, thank you.
Before you answer, Emma, raise your hand. Emma, you want to chime in? From in front of the camera? Excellent. We got some chiming.
Oh, I mean, I kind of just want to say that, like, I actually relate to what you're saying a lot because I come from China. And I also feel this sense of like really, really bad things are happening at home, but I am somewhere else, somewhere safe. But the people that I care about, who I grew up about, they live in this. And I definitely feel the sense of like something bad could happen to all of these people at that, like at every moment while I'm just like here, like in this really privileged space. But I feel like it doesn't really, like, I don't know, I still feel like I'm not fully out of the danger, even if I'm here and like I can see like other people from China, like I can kind of just see like how that affected them so much that I can just like tell, like, you know, the way they act, the way they react to things, and like how, you know, this, I guess this pressure to just kind of get yourself more normal for the world, you know, to like act like all this grand scale things don't have so much impact on you, and like I kind of have just to function as if you come from a place that doesn't have all of that stuff. So yeah, I just want to say that like I really like relate to that.
Thank you. I mean, there's not a place on this, well, I don't know, I can't maybe make that blanket statement, but I am not familiar with a place on this planet where people don't experience trauma and oppression in some way, shape, or form, including everywhere in this country, right? And like, it's sort of baffling to me, but at the same time, I understand the inclination. But baffling to me to sort of take it back to this like design process that we're in for Jeff, for this high school, that teachers are struggling, students are struggling, families are struggling, administrators are struggling, every person on the project management team, like all the people that I have interfaced with in the district, whether they are driving this project forward or frontline, like on the ground workers or in the system in some other way as students or families, everyone is under-resourced and being asked to do way too much with not enough time or support. And that support isn't just like, oh, you need some help with your homework. That support is, holy shit, we're still going through a pandemic. Probably, if you polled every student or teacher at the school alone, you would be hard pressed to find someone who wasn't personally impacted by a loss in the last few years. And yet, because we want, well, I guess because systems are constantly seeking to return to equilibrium, and a system that is unjust wants to stay in its well-worn grooves, and people don't feel like they have the agency to behave differently or act outside of those well-worn grooves. We just sort of accept people don't look up. And that's sort of my experience. People don't ask critical questions. Because if you ask those questions, then probably there's not going to be a lot of support or people around you who also are like ready or equipped to address those questions or try to change things. And then you're alone. And then you're vulnerable and you're isolated, which capitalism is isolating. But there's this cognitive dissonance maybe of, we know that people are harmed, we know that people are experiencing trauma, we know that people are that no one, whether they're the community that we say we're serving or the people trying to do this project, are feeling healthy or well in this process. And yet we can't or won't change it, because that would mean entering the unknown. That would take more time. And we are living through a revolutionary and reactionary moment in this country as well. In 2020 and the movement for Black Lives and the uprisings that we saw across this country, that was a revolutionary moment, a rupturing of the dominant order. We now live in a period of time where those systems of injustice and oppression and those power structures that reinforce dominant cultural hegemony of white supremacy are reasserting themselves, and that's a reaction. And that's a normal, it's a wave. Like, or maybe it's a cycle, or maybe it's a spiral. But there's repetition in it. And so I think like I don't know, to sort of tie a bow on it for this session, perhaps, my reflection of how this process at Jeff is going in relation to all of that is, it is different because we participated in it in a different way than it would have been if we had not. That open space for possibilities that weren't present previously. Although I have my frustrations and anger and like upset at this desire to just go back to baseline, or this desire to reduce everything to the number of people we've talked to. At the same time, we have done more meaningful engagement and had more meaningful dialogue and listened more deeply on this project than this school district has done on any of the other projects that they have worked on, that they have instigated. We broke some things, and that breaking means that they can be set and healed in a different shape. And that doesn't mean we won, but I think if we're looking for healing, or at least for me, if the goal is that the shape is more just after we went through this process than it was before we went through this process, then that's worthwhile. It's worthwhile. It's necessary, even. The system is too big to change all at one time. And we'll break ourselves if we try to do that too.
Yeah, I think that's a good signatory, and it's interesting. I don't know, we like did in depth this, but I have been talking about it with a lot of different students in a lot of different contexts. It's just like also like setting your expectations. Like, you know, I just did a critique in a class. Some people fell short or whatever, but like, you know, creating a plan that fits within the time that, you know, we're getting ready to plan something. And so it's like, we don't have so much time, like what is the right and we'll probably talk about this later, but I was thinking about it, it's like, what is the right thing, where it's like not a headache, but it fits, and it like does the right thing. So I like that comment, that otherwise we break ourselves if we were trying to change more than it's feasible within that. Well, Kareem, thank you for joining us. We do a little round of applause.
Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining us on short notice. Thanks for fleshing out the series in a way that we haven't really in before. You're our first, I guess you said that you're an artist and do all kind of art things, but a lot of our guests were like self-identifying artists by practice. But as I figured, you'd fit right in. So thank you again, and I'll see you at the next whatever it is we're doing.
Thanks indeed.
Good luck in the rest of your afternoon, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks all. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Alrighty, tidy.